Last week saw an extremely intense terror attack in Moscow. Now, it's claimed in the media that ISIS has taken responsibility for the attack, but the men involved have been captured, mercilessly beaten by Russian forces, and now Vladimir Putin's saying that these are Ukrainian-linked individuals. The story I've read, I don't have it pulled up right now, but it appears that these men fled. Major news was reported that they did not capture the terrorists, but this was apparently intentional to see where these men would try to go. And the reporting is they made attempts to enter into Ukraine, into the conflicted territory. It's fog of war. I can't tell you what's true or what's not true. I can tell you what's reported. Vladimir Putin is claiming Ukraine's involved because of course he is. The most predictable news ever. And now we have fears once again that World War III is on the horizon. Fears spiral after Vladimir Putin's missile roar into Polish airspace during Ukraine blitz. Now, my friends, the big news today, of course, is the deadline for Donald Trump and whether or not he'll be able to pay off this ridiculous and unconstitutional, violating the Eighth Amendment, fine that was imposed on him for what is not even a crime. But as we await that, we do have major news developing over the weekend. And I know many people often say, Tim, don't say World War III. It cheapens it. It's blah, blah. You know, I have two minds about it. I agree. How many times am I going to be like, oh, World War III again? No, I agree. And this is what the news reports. World War III fear. But then I'm of another mind about it. I'm actually more worried we stop caring. That's the tough part, I guess. The reality is these are the building blocks of World War III. And don't get me started on Israel, the Houthis, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iran, Iraq. All of that stuff plays a role as well. But what we're seeing with Vladimir Putin outright saying, I will nuke you, and Macron and France, a chief military leader in France, now saying, yes, we will send troops. I think the challenge we face with this is that we get tired of it. I get tired of it. We put out a story and it says, Vladimir Putin threatens to nuke West. And we're like, holy crap, that's crazy. And then a week goes by, nothing happens. Then a week goes by and we're like, yeah, he threatened to nuke us before and nothing happened. We get complacent. You look back in the history books and you see how history is condensed. It seems to make more sense. But I assure you, in 100 years, they'll say, following the terror attack in Moscow, Vladimir Putin issued a strong threat, started arming more troops and deploying more troops. And it's like, wait, that hasn't happened yet. Right. Because what they're going to do is, this just happened last week. Maybe in 6 months, Russia has ramped up conscription, gotten more troops, and expands the war. Or this missile strike. History will be written in a very condensed manner. Like, the fascinating thing, I think, most of you probably already know by now because I say it quite often when referring to historical conflict. The American Revolution started. And then 1 year and 1 month later, the Founding Fathers signed the Declaration of Independence. So we were quite literally already at war when the Declaration was signed. But most people actually believe the Founding Fathers went, I hereby declare, and then sent a letter to the king and he went, whoa, send in the troops. Not actually what happened. It was a 20-year period. But we read history and it's like an overnight thing. This is where we're currently at. The breaking news from yesterday night. A Russian missile floated over Polish airspace, sparking NATO outrage. France is saying we will send in troops. And that means, my friends, if NATO deploys troops, the U.S. is involved because we're basically NATO. And you think Russia just goes, oh, golly, I'm still at war with you. Look, it ain't no joke. The U.S. and Russia are at war right now. And they're just playing this game where they're saying it's not true. I can't believe there's any Americans still in Russia right now. The Sun says, Vladimir Putin's 57 missile onslaught plus a drone attack hammered critical infrastructure in Kiev and the western Ukrainian region of Lviv. But one of the Russian cruise missiles stayed over NATO territory in Poland for 39 seconds, triggering a major alert and fears of an escalation. Allied warplanes were scrambled to counter the dangerous incursion near the town of Osserdo. Meanwhile, British Storm Shadow missiles were said to have blasted 2 more Russian landing ships with deadly strikes in the Black Sea naval port Sevastopol. Can I just point this out? British missiles struck Russian landing ships? They're not going to say it. There will be no formal declaration. One day, they will just say, war with Russia continues. Because they can't declare it, because the people would oppose it. Nobody wants to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. They're just doing it. This is amazing. The Yamal and the Azov, each worth 170 million pounds, were knocked out in the latest blow to Putin's naval power base. Another Storm Shadow cruise missile had earlier devastated Russia's main communication center of its vulnerable Black Sea fleet. Defense Secretary Grant Shapps called the Black Sea Blitz an historic moment yesterday. Ukraine has switched its focus to the occupied Crimean Peninsula after suffering setbacks in eastern Donbass and Luhansk. Mr. Shapps suggested it could turn the war back in favor of Ukraine, President Zelensky. I am not convinced, my friends. This is from RFI.fr. NewsGuard certified. French military chiefs backs Macron over possibility of sending troops to Ukraine. Russia should not expect the West to limit its support for Ukraine to supplying arms, says the chief of staff of France's armed forces, General Thierry Burkhard. His words echo President Emmanuel Macron's recent controversial suggestion that a military intervention could not be ruled out. The news from last week on the terror attacks as we saw them. Shocking videos, man. I don't know if you guys were able to see it. Some of the most nightmarish and brutal. These videos get sent to me, of course. I mean, I'm plugged in the news 24/7. And the first thing I said was Ukraine. Only a moron would say otherwise. Ukraine. For what purpose would anyone attack Russia? Now, to be fair, there's a decent probability that ISIS could make sense because you have Chechnyan Muslims and, other anti-Russian forces that have long plagued Russia. But Ukraine makes the most sense. Now, it could be that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and these Islamic extremists from Chechnya or neighboring regions may have gone to Ukraine for aid, and it's basically you've got a privateer type scenario. Ukraine says, we're at war, you're at war, what do you want? And these guys say, you give us what we need and we can carry out these attacks. And then Ukraine can deny all involvement. But it's one big war, baby. Putin tries to link, from the New York Times, assailants to Ukraine. The New York Times reports, President Putin of Russia laid the groundwork on Saturday for blaming Ukraine for the Moscow concert hall attack. And in making his first remarks on the assault more than 19 hours after it began. In a 5-minute televised address, he claimed that someone in Ukraine had tried to help the attackers escape across the border from Russia before they were apprehended by Russian security services. He did not definitively pin the attack on Ukraine, nor did he refer to the assessment by American officials that a branch of the Islamic State was behind it. They were trying to hide, and they were moving toward Ukraine, he said, referring to the 4 men who carried out the attack and who the Kremlin said had been captured in Western Russia. Based on preliminary information, a window for crossing the border was prepared for them by the Ukrainian side. Ukrainian officials have repeatedly denied having anything to do with the attack, and American officials have said there is no evidence of Ukrainian involvement. American officials voiced concern on Friday that Mr. Putin could seek to falsely blame Ukraine for the attack. Now let's pause. We have no idea. It is entirely possible that Vladimir Putin is behind the attack on the concert hall. Let's break down the possibilities and try to do a general assessment as to what we think may be the most likely. Ukraine, they're the force behind the attack. Why would that make sense? They're at war. They're on the western border. These men fled to the western border, reportedly. Should that be true? Certainly makes the most sense. Ukraine has engaged in aerial drone terror strikes already. And I say terror because they're targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. It would make sense. Next up is Muslim extremists. Decent probability. I'd put it on the lower end of the scale. Maybe they decided just now we're going to go engage in this terror attack, but I don't think that makes a lot of sense, to be completely honest. It may half make sense. If anything, these extremist groups from Chechnya or other nearby regions that are at war with Russia or fighting Russia would certainly have an incentive to go and join Ukraine to fight against Russia. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. However, it doesn't mean that they would actually be friends with Ukraine, so it's hard to know for sure. There's a strong possibility it would be Islamist extremists. That's fair. That's fair. Though I would put on the lowest possible end. Next up, we have, of course, a false flag operation by Russia themselves to justify conscription and build public support for the war against Ukraine. I don't see what Ukraine has to gain from being involved in this terror attack. None at all. I can understand why ISIS would gain from it. So if we break this down, there's a lot to consider. And I'll stress this again. When I first saw this, I said, how would the West gain from a terror attack on civilian infrastructure? This one is blunt and straightforward. Terror. Ukraine sending a message to the people who live in Moscow, you will not be free from this conflict. If our people see it, you will see it too. But if that were the case, you'd expect Ukraine to take responsibility. Maybe not. All they needed was for Vladimir Putin to say it was Ukraine, and their message has been heard loud and clear. The people of Russia may now think, I don't want to live this way, and they could flee. It could disrupt economics, could slow down Russia, or maybe even turn the tide against Vladimir Putin. However, Putin is taking the inverse bet and blames Ukraine directly. I think it would actually just bolster support from the Russians. Of course, Russian television is not saying it's Ukraine anyway. They're saying it's NATO. And when you got Macron saying outright, we will be sending troops, why would anyone think otherwise? I think that what makes the most sense is Ukraine did it. Really. I mean, this is war. Now, you're going to love this one, my friends, from the New York Post. What would happen if Washington, D.C., if it were attacked by a nuclear bomb? Well, I got to be honest with you guys. We here at Timcast have taken this question quite seriously. We've done a range of simulations. I'm kidding. As a website where you can type in the city and it'll show you the blast radius. The good news is even the most powerful bombs on Earth are not big enough to reach where we are outside of DC. But I got to be honest, we're a little bit too close for comfort. I think we are like 15 miles outside of the largest possible blast radius. So not a good thing. But fortunately, with the jet stream current, the nuclear fallout would flow in the other direction. So we're mostly okay. That being said, were a bomb to drop on DC, it would probably, I don't think it would shatter the windows of any of our buildings. We're outside of even like all of the affected range. You've got the fireball range, the radiation range, the shock wave. So there's the initial blast. Then there's the burning range where it's like everything bursts into flames. Then you have like the radiation, depending on the bomb too. And then you have the shock wave. We're not even in the shock wave range. So I think for the biggest bombs, our windows wouldn't even break. It's kind of wild if you think about it because we're not that far away. But everyone is kind of wondering, what are you doing, New York Post? Why are you sharing this story with everybody? Do you guys remember a couple years ago, New York put out a duck and cover PSA, public service announcement. In the event of a nuclear attack, here's what you need to do. Maybe we're closer than we think. I guess what they said was to never look at the explosion. If you see the bright flash, get down because the light travels faster than the shockwave and the sound. And they said to stuff towels under the doors of your home and try, because you want to keep the radioactive particles from coming in. The gases can move through, the particles can't. That's why I think this is a really important thing for people to understand too. When I went to Fukushima with Luke Rutkowski and the red zone where the reactor went off, we got these like almost paper suits. It was like a thin, I think it was paper. I got to be honest. They're like white radiation suits. And I was actually kind of surprised. I asked them, how does it work? And they said the purpose of the suit is so that all the radioactive particles land on the suit and then you don and doff. That means when you take the suit off, you make sure nothing touches your skin. You ball it up inside out and they throw it in a bag because you don't want that radioactive stuff on your skin and you don't want to eat it. So we wore masks and everything else. And I want to say this too, sad. The woman who gave us the guided tour, we call them fixers. She was older. She did not wear the protective equipment. She died of cancer. And it was not that long after. Take it seriously, man. No joke. Here we go. The New York Post writes, as 2 regional wars now rage with no clear ending, the world is closer than it has been in decades to the specter of nuclear war. Hell on earth, Washington, D.C. A 1 megaton thermonuclear weapon detonation begins with a flash of light and heat so tremendous it is impossible for the human mind to comprehend. 180 million degrees Fahrenheit is 4 or 5 times hotter than the temperature at the center of the sun. In the first fraction of a millisecond after the bomb strikes the Pentagon, there's a light. Soft X-ray light with a very short wavelength. The light superheats the surrounding air to millions of degrees, creating a massive fireball that expands at millions of miles per hour. Within seconds, this fireball increases to a diameter of a little more than a mile. Its light and heat is so intense that concrete surfaces explode. Metal objects melt or evaporate. Stone shatters. Humans instantaneously convert into combusting carbon. The 5-story, 5-sided structure and everything inside its 6.5 million square feet of office space explodes into superheated dust. All 27,000 Pentagon employees perishing instantly. Not a single thing in the fireball remains. Nothing. Ground zero is zero. Take a look at this. These are the landmarks, I guess. Yeah, if a nuclear strike went for D.C., I gotta tell you, I'm pretty sure it can't. D.C. is probably the most heavily guarded place on the planet. There may be a couple others that are classified, but I'm talking in terms of conventional strikes. There are likely surrounding D.C. surface-to-air missiles. You think the Iron Dome is effective? Israel, and they have the THAAD, which is, I forgot what THAAD stands for. Sorry, it's THAAD. They have that in Korea. Yeah, spare me, dude. The U.S. likely has nuclear deterrent missiles surrounding D.C. like crazy. You know why? If there's one thing you can rely on, it's that politicians will spend everything on themselves. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to expenditures, yeah, the people in D.C. are certainly going to reinforce the place they have to be. And they'll say, and to be fair, true, we must survive for continuity of government. And I say mostly true, but, they're going to protect themselves. Traveling at the speed of light, the radiating heat from the fireball ignites everything flammable several miles out in every direction. Curtains, paper, books, and wood fences, people's clothing, dry leaves explode into flames and become kindling for a great firestorm that begins to consume a 100 or more square mile area that was home to 6 million people. So this is DC in general. Let me see if I can pull up the nuclear map app actually, because I think there's an app for this. Nuke map, is that it? Yeah, nuke map. Here we go. Let's pull this. Let's pull this bad boy in. And select a preset. Let's do Washington D.C. And they said 1 megaton. So let's zoom out quite a bit. Here's Maryland. And let's see. We're going to do a 1 megaton bomb. Wow, look at all these bombs. So let's do the Minuteman 1 warhead and detonate. There we go. So I'll give you a general idea of where we're at. I mention it often. We're in the Panhandle Tri-State. So we're up here. There's Martinsburg. We'll use Martinsburg as a good point of reference because that's where one of our main buildings is, and the rest of the studio and everything is relatively close. So you can see we're really far away from where that blast would be. A one megaton. So for those that are just listening, let me explain. DC were hit by a megaton bomb. There is a small fireball ring, which is 1 kilometer, and that is the crater. You then have the moderate blast damage radius, which extends 7 kilometers. It's crazy. Thermal radiation, 3rd degree burns. So everybody in the first, they're dead. Then you get the thermal radiation, which is 12 kilometers. And understand the area is exponentially increasing. From 7 kilometers to 155 kilometers squared to 12 kilometers is now 466 kilometers squared. And then you have the light blast damage radius. That's the shock wave, covering 1,230 square kilometers, extending about 20 kilometers out. So this does massive damage to Tysons, Bethesda. You've got Groveton, Suitland. I don't even know what most of these places are. Landover, Seabrook. But I mean, Reston's not even that bad. I mean, here's the crazy thing. I got to be honest. Driving from Reston to DC is like 20 minutes, depending on traffic, I guess. So just understand that context. It's really interesting. If you're in DC and you drive out to Reston, it could take, let's be fair, like no traffic, 20 minutes. Now think about how far you have to drive to escape a nuclear blast. That's why I think it's always important to consider, like, you can run from a nuclear bomb. Let's go to Tsar Bomba, the largest USSR bomb designed at 100 megatons, and boom. Now, us here over in Martinsburg, still fine. Still doing all right. Granted, tain't no way a 100 megaton bomb is getting anywhere near this place, but that would be wild. You have the thermal radiation radius covering 17,000 square kilometers. That's nuts. But that's the biggest bomb ever detonated, ever designed. They never actually detonated that. The most I've ever done was 50 megatons. So Tsar Bomba. And wow, this thing was, thermal radiation extends beyond even the shock wave. Now, there's an important thing for y'all to understand when it comes to nukes. The radiation is intentional. You can see the radiation radius. Many of these bombs intentionally or do not intentionally have a radioactive radiation yield. Some of them are designed not to. So let's see if we get to here we go. China. I don't want to go with China. What do we think that here's the largest, the highest ICBM US deployed is the Titan II. The first H-bomb IV Mike was 10 megatons. That's crazy. Massive. But let's see what we got with Russia's. Realistic Castle Bravo is the largest US bomb. Let's go down to the Soviet Cuban Missile Crisis, 2 megatons. And so once we get to 2 megatons, we're still not even near Reston. So doubling the blast power, it's still not making that big difference. That being said, I mean, I'm basically saying I'm going to be okay. Yeah, but lots of other people will not be. And let's what are the casualties? The estimated casualties in a 2 megaton nuke will be 731,000 dead, 1.1 million injured. Let's even go back to a 1 megaton. Let's just say it's a 1 megaton bomb. We're looking at estimated fatalities, still calculating, 524,000 dead, 915,000 injured. I don't think people understand. You know, even when we deal with war and conflict, we don't see numbers this big. We have mass shootings and it's like 17 dead, or in Russia, I think it's up to 170 or some huge number. But 170 ain't nothing compared to 524,000 dead from one nuclear strike. I can't tell you where we go, my friends. I cannot, certainly. We got the suspects being dragged into court. They ain't looking too good. The Hill reporting, most Americans in new survey say another world war is likely in the next 5 to 10 years. And why would they be wrong? And of course, the Mirror running this story, where Vladimir Putin would strike UK with nuclear weapons, and it's not where you might think. One thing to consider, DC may not be the principal target for Vladimir Putin or any other country. It's hard to know exactly where they would strike, but it may be something called a multiple independently targeted reentry vehicle. MIRVs. 1 ICBM, 12 warheads. And the strategy with them is basically to pepper one city with multiple warheads to create maximum damage. The warheads detonate in the air, not on the ground. So if you ever see a warhead falling, it's going to burst in the air, not on the ground. This idea of the ground explosion in the mushroom cloud, wrong. Air burst spreads out and blankets more of the ground. And if it were to detonate on the ground, it would create a blast crater, which would deflect a lot of the shock wave and the damage. Let's hope and pray it doesn't come to this. But you see, your leaders, if we can even call them that, are hell-bent on driving us into World War III. Why? Ukraine. Maybe. I've heard some say that the U.S. is desperately trying to spark World War III because they know the fiat's on the verge of collapse. take a look at the financial markets and the predictors. They're off the charts. They're saying like something is wrong. I don't know enough about economics. All I can tell you is I see them on Twitter, I see them on X, and they're saying things like unprecedented this, national debt's too high, interest rates are too high, the whole financial system is about to implode, and now here we are. Well, let's get back to the waiting game to see what happens with Donald Trump and submitting this $500 million. He says he's got the cash. We'll see. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.